Hey everybody, welcome back to John's Firearm 705. Today we have the Henry H001 lever action rifle, chambered of course, and 22 long rifle out. What we're going to go through the process today is taking everything out of the receiver, the locking bar, the trigger, the hammer, the carrier, and all that. We're going to strip down the total inside. I'm going to show you how to do that. It's actually quite simple, and we're going to show you how to put it all back together. For this particular job, what I have is a 1/8 punch, 5/32 punch. I got a screwdriver that fits the receiver cover screws, and also have a smaller screwdriver that's we're gonna need to take out the carrier. And I also have a little tiny magnetic screwdriver to help put back in the carrier screws because they're pretty small and fidgety. So let's get right down to it. First thing we're gonna wanna do is take out 4 receiver cover screws. We got 2 of course on this side and 2 on the other side. So we'll take those out right now, and underneath each one they have their respective locking washers, and they are an external tooth locking washer. All right, we got 4 screws out with the locking washer. We'll just set those aside. Now I've already check safed my firearm, but just for the sake of YouTube, we'll go ahead and do that again. We'll take out the inner magazine tube, set that aside, let gravity pull out any rounds if there was any in there. We'll also open up our action, take a look in there, check it with your finger, check with a little flashlight, make sure there's no rounds in the carrier or in the chamber. This firearm is safe unloaded, which I knew it was anyway. So that being said, we'll go ahead and close the lever. We'll take out the 1 screw down here for our stock. Set that aside, pull our stock off, put that aside. Now at this point, what I like to do is I just pull the receiver cover straight back as long as the hammer's cocked, just like that. And I put my hand on top of the bolt, pull the lever down a little bit. That'll unlock the bolt from its position. We'll set that aside. We don't need that in today's demonstration. Now we can take a look at the internals here. The first thing we're going to take out is this locking bar, and if you might notice when we put it back in, if you can see it there, right there, it goes underneath the top of the lever. There's a little nub that sticks out on the locking bar, and it goes underneath that lever. Just remember that for reassembly. So the first thing we're going to do is take out the locking bar pin up here. I'm going to use my 5/32 punch for that. Comes out right there. I'll set it aside. I should be able to just pull out the locking bar. You can see that's that little raised part that goes underneath the top of the lever, and underneath there's a little recess where part of the spring sits. And there's the spring inside there. Just knock that out. And we'll set all those pieces with each other. We got the locking bar spring, and the locking bar pin. Okay, now the next thing we can do is, because the locking bar is out of the way, I'm going to move the hammer all the way forward. But while I'm doing this, what I got to do is depress the trigger, bring this forward slowly, but I'm also going to capture the spring and guide rod here, because if you don't do that, it wants to jump out at you. Okay, once that's forward, we can just lift this up, lift it out. That's the hammer guide and the hammer spring. I'll set that aside. So now we can take out the hammer pin. It's this one down here. Again, I'm using the 5/32 punch. Just push that straight out. I'll set that over with the guide and the spring. And then our hammer just comes out simple, just like that. Next thing we might as well take out is the trigger. And it's got a little wee smaller pin down here, the trigger pin. So I'll pop that out with my smaller 1/8 punch. See, it's a smaller little pin, set that aside. The trigger will pop right out. Now if you notice on the trigger, there's this little wee tiny spring. And if you've never taken yours apart and this is your first time, you'll notice there's some grease in there, and that just holds the spring in place. I've never taken it out. I've never changed that grease. I just leave it as is and it works just fine. We'll set that aside. So now we can go ahead and take off the lever. We got to pop out the lever pin right here. Again, I'm using my 5/32 punch for that removal. Just push it straight through. The lever pin. Now the lever, to get it out, there's a few things inside that it needs to clear. What I find is just go back all the way, pull it down, rock it forward, wriggle it forward a little bit, and it comes straight out, okay? So we'll set that aside. Now what we got to take out is the carrier. Well, to get the carrier out on mine, there's two little screws, carrier screws, one here and one here. If you have an older model, you might have a screw here and here, but not this one. So let's go ahead and take out these two carrier screws. And for that, I'm using my little bit thinner screwdriver. Okay, take the other one. Now when you take both of these out, the carrier, here, let me show you some space here, I got it all covered up. The carrier is gonna want to jump out of the way. Okay, it's gonna want to spring out a little bit, but it won't go too far, so don't worry about it. Okay, so I'll take out these little carrier screws, and you can see they're like super little tiny. One there. Incidentally, that's why I have the magnetic little tiny screwdriver to put these ones back in. They're just a little too fidgety for my big man hands. Okay, so once that's out, see what I mean? The carrier's kind of popped up a little bit. Now it's connected to the carrier feed bar in here, and underneath the carrier, there's the carrier spring and the carrier tube that houses the spring. So let's just go and pull this up. Maybe I'll pull it down, let gravity help me out here. Okay, so once we get it out, you need to, let me see if I can show you here, lift it up, and then you can pull it off the carrier feed bar. And also, what happened for me is my little spring and the tube came out of the bottom of the carrier. That's what the carrier tube looks like and the carrier spring. They go together only one way. One end's open, the other end is solid. And they go in the bottom here, just like this, okay? But we got to make sure that the feed lever is inside the carrier first before we put in that spring and that tube. So let's set all those pieces aside. Now this bar, it sits on a little stud. So all we got to simply do is lift it up off the stud and pull it out. Now keep note, this raised part faces the opposite way. Like where it sits on the stud, that raised part is coming up. So yeah, we just take that out. And that there is totally stripped down. See inside there, this piece here and that there are the two things that the lever needs to go around to get in and out. Now you can see in the bottom here, this is, I don't know what happened with this Henry. There's a lot of, the finish has come off. I've noticed some of the other models, the older ones, it's not a flat receiver. It's actually got some ridges on there. So I guess at some point in time they changed the process. And to be honest with you, I'm not too impressed with the finish on the inside of my Henry. But whatever, it is what it is. Okay, so now we're going to reinstall everything. Now there's a few places on this that I like to lubricate when I put it back together, just because of the metal contact areas. First thing we're going to want to do is give our carrier a really good clean up inside there. Okay, first thing I'm going to want to do is get out my tube. It's jiggling around up in there. We don't need that. There we go. Now I always give it a really good cleaning up in here, the feed ramp. I run a Q-tip up inside there, make sure that's all really clean. So now before we reinstall, like I say, I'm going to put a little glob of grease on that little stud there. You don't need much, just a little glob there. Maybe I'll use a Q-tip. Because I find if you do lubricate that, see I got a little bit of grease on there. Okay. So now to reinstall, we're going to take our carrier feed lever, again with this nub, that raised part facing up. We're going to put this down and in and on that little stud, just like that. Just move it back and forth a little bit, just kind of work that grease around, get it all nicely lubricated. Okay, so now with this sticking out, I'm going to grab the carrier and we're going to put that slot onto this. See if I can show you here. It's pretty straightforward and obvious. Just kind of put it into there. Okay. And when you get it in, as far as it goes, now we're going to insert the tube for the carrier and the spring. Now I usually attach the tube to the spring all in one unit like this. And just set it up in there, just like that, okay? Now what we can do while holding it flat is just kind of rock it down back into place. Okay, just like that. Now I'm holding it down and I'm pushing it forward, okay? And what that does is it helps line up these two screws for the carrier screws. So what I like to do here is I'll take one of the little carrier screws, I'll set it in place, grab the other one, I'll set it in place. Okay, see they're in place there. I'll take my little magnetic screwdriver and I just go backwards a little bit till it feels like it's kind of dropped into the threads. Start it up. This one came out on me. There we go. Backwards a bit, just like, there we go. Now I got started. I'll switch off to my other better screwdriver here and just tighten those down. And I try and tighten them down evenly. I don't like to have one get too far the other one. So it'll start to get a little bit tight. I'll bring the other guy down. Now I'll snug that one up. Snug up the other one. That's good. Now again, you don't want to over tighten those. You just need them snug. You don't want to be stripping out the white metal. I think it's aluminum anyway of the carrier. It's you just don't want to strip that out. So that there puts in the carrier and all the respective pieces, the carrier feed lever, the tube, the spring, and the two screws that hold it in place. So that's there. A little bit better angle. You can see everything is installed. We got that carrier feed lever on the pin. You can see it inside there. We got the carrier in place. We have the two screws, of course, holding it in place. And underneath inside there, we have the carrier spring and the carrier tube. So now that that's all together, we're going to want to put in our lever. Now again, what I find is I put it in like this. Tilt it back a bit. Pull it back. Back up. Lift it up. And then forward. And that'll help it clear all the items inside that it needs to get around. Now we can just line up that pin hole, put in our lever pin. There we go. Pop it in, make sure it's flush. And you'll know if everything's right when you can feel the resistance of the lever on that carrier feed lever. You can see it going down inside the carrier. Okay, so that's all good. So let's go ahead and put the trigger back in. Again, keeping in mind that little spring. So I like to kind of hold everything sideways. I guess I'll try doing it this way to show you. I'll go and put the trigger back in. Try not to knock that spring around. I'll line up the hole. Get my little flashlight out here to make sure I can see the hole. Once it's lined up, simply put in the pin for it. Okay, and you'll see it's in place. Again, make sure this pin is flush on both sides. You can tell the spring's still in there. So the next thing we want to put in is the hammer. So we'll take our hammer, bring it in here, line it up with the hole, put in our hammer pin. Go. Again, making sure that pin is flush on both sides. Now here's the only part that's a little bit finicky. At this point, you want to depress your trigger and move your hammer all the way forward. we're going to want to grab our hammer spring and our hammer guide rod. And again, for lubrication, what I like here is I put a little glob of lubrication in this little housing down here where the guide rod goes through. It'll just help everything move along when you're cycling the firearm and whatnot. So now, actually, you know what, while we're here, I might as well put a little bit of lubrication on the other end that fits into the hammer. There we go. Okay, so now the back of this guide rod needs to go through the hole here, and it needs to be lined up pretty good, or it might have a bit of a hard time going through there. So I try and line it up. I usually have the spring just up a little bit from that nub. Make sure it's lined up. Push the other end down. Pull your hammer back. And you can see it's in place there, okay? See how it came through there? Let's move that lubrication around. Maybe put a little bit on the spring. Just keep that all well lubricated. Okay, so now we can go ahead and put back in our locking bar. Keeping in mind, like I showed you earlier, this little nub needs to go underneath the top of the lever. Oh, first thing we gotta do, is we gotta put in the locking bar spring. What I find easiest to do here is I just grab the spring on my 1/8 punch, just like that. Put it down into that hole inside the receiver there, that little recess that houses it. Okay. See? Right back in there. And I'll take the locking bar, again, putting this little nub down and somewhat underneath the top of the, here if I can show you here. Goes underneath the end of the top of your lever here. And then that recess on the bottom will go on top of that locking bar spring we put in. Just like that. Okay, now we'll go back in and put the locking bar pin in place. Just like that. There we go. You can see it's working good. When you move your lever, that locking bar will go down, which allows the bolt to move. Now what that also does is prevent your hammer from going too far forward so that your hammer guide and your hammer spring don't pop out on you. Okay, and that's pretty much it. That's the assembly and disassembly of the inside. Let's go ahead and put our firearm back together. What I like to do is just move the lever down a little bit so that the bolt can go around the top of the lever here. And where did I put the bolt? There it is. Okay, so you see, I'm just putting it there. Then I'm just going to close the lever slowly, lining up the bolt so the bolt goes in place where it needs to be. Just like that, locks into place. The hammer's cocked, so it makes it real easy to just grab our receiver. Now I also like to pinch the bolt onto the receiver here so it doesn't get caught and move around on us. Just like that, and then just simply go all the way forward. Now we'll put in our 4 external tooth washers and our 4 receiver screws. And again, I like to just kind of go backwards so it kind of seats itself in there. Don't want to be cross stripping any threads out. Helps when you don't drop your screws. Okay, we'll go ahead and just tighten these up, but definitely don't snug them down yet till we get the 2 on the other side in. Just till you feel them tighten up just a smidge. The other 2 on the other side. Of course, remembering your external tooth locking washer first. Pardon me while I find that other screw. Oh, there it is. Okay. Didn't go too far. And our 4th receiver cover screw with the external tooth lock washer. Okay, now that I got all 4 in, I'll go ahead and tighten them up. And they just need to be snug. You know what? I'd rather these things somehow back off and loose a little bit as opposed to over tightening it and stripping out the screw hole. Okay, now all we gotta do is put our stock back on. Now, I made a mistake putting this on once. For some reason, I thought it looked better this way. However, if you notice, it has these little notches. That needs to go up top. That's the way it fits on there. Just like that. Put in our screw. And again, snug, but not overly tight. We'll depress the trigger while holding the hammer. Bring up the hammer slowly. Do a little function check. Pull it down a quarter, I guess it's about a quarter or an eighth of an inch until you hear one click. That's the safety. Cycle's nice and smooth. Cannot fire it, so that's all good. And one final check, I have some dummy rounds, so just want to make sure everything's working good inside there. I have some of these little 22 long rifle dummy rounds. Let's go ahead and put those in there. And the last one, this nice plasticky orange one. Okay, put in our inner magazine tube. Lock it in place. Now, let's do a little function check. There we go. Yeah, we're happy. And there's the orange one. Double check, we're empty. Decock the gun. And that's it, guys. That's my take on how to take all the parts out of your Henry H001 22 long rifle. Everything out of the receiver, like I said, the trigger, the carrier, the hammer spring and guide. I had one fellow comment on another Henry video I did that his hammer spring and guide came out somehow. I don't really know how that could happen unless it got bent or something. I don't know. But if you're watching, hopefully this video helps you put it back in. I was a little intimidated the first time I took all that stuff out. I didn't really want to do it. I looked around on YouTube and I quite frankly couldn't find too many videos that were clear. I found a lot of videos just on how to change out your lever. Anyway, so that's it, guys. I hope that helps you out. Peace out, have fun, be safe, cause no harm, and as always, if you have a chance, get out to the range.